Welcome to the 700 Club. Suffering and torment in Venezuela. 1,000,000% inflation. The place, millions, and literally millions, not hundreds of thousands, millions of people are fleeing the country to try to get out. And I was telling Terry as we began this program that years ago, Caracas, Venezuela was considered the most beautiful country, the most beautiful city, and it was a model of city planning, and the wealth of that country was just legendary. Now they're to the brink of destruction, and the problem is the Venezuelan military. The Venezuelan military. What is wrong? It is a criminal enterprise. They're stealing money. They're dealing drugs. They're laundering money. They're doing everything. It's like a mafia has seized that country, and they don't want to let go. So we've got to figure out a way to get the military to go along with Guaido instead of Maduro, because their future, unless there's amnesty and maybe a little bit of some money being paid to them, something's got to come up with a solution. But that's the way it's going to be, because the military leaders are trying to support that corrupt regime. Terry.
Well, our administration is backing the interim president, Juan Guaido. However, many believe that Venezuela's armed forces are going to decide the country's future. Dale Hurd has the story.
Members of the Venezuelan opposition approach an army base, offering soldiers amnesty from prosecution if they turn against the government. The battle for the future of Venezuela is a battle for the hearts and minds of the Venezuelan armed forces. Anyone who wants to get rid of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro cannot do it without the army. And that's the tricky part, because the army has been a willing partner in the Venezuelan government's criminal activities. Latin American expert Juan Carlos Hidalgo.
It is very important when we analyze the situation in Venezuela to keep in mind that this is not a regular dictatorship. This is a mafia. This is a criminal gang. They're deeply involved in crimes against human rights, corruption, drug trafficking. The estimated corruption runs in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Hidalgo says Venezuela's military leaders have a strong incentive to keep Nicolas Maduro in power.
The armed forces know that the alternative for them to be in power is either going to jail, face the justice in Venezuela under a democratic government, or faces extradition to the United States for drug trafficking.
And that's why the opposition is offering the military amnesty. The other power broker is Cuba. Cuba is heavily invested in the survival of Maduro and is spying on the army and helping to enforce loyalty.
Thousands of Cuban troops are deeply embedded in the armed forces, as well as intelligence services and secret security services. This is why it's so difficult for troops to launch an uprising.
Maduro has begun maneuvering to crush the rebellion, and Tuesday announced a formal investigation of opposition leader Juan Guaido, recognized by the U.S. and several nations as the real leader of Venezuela. Guaido said if anything happens to him, the protest will intensify. President Trump called Guaido and offered his support and said all options are on the table in dealing with Maduro. But Guaido has said he's against using the U.S. military to get rid of Maduro. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. I said yesterday, and I say it again, the United States really should not, at least overtly, get involved. There are things we can do under the radar and under the cover of secrecy, but we should never do anything openly, because it'll just backfire against us. But it's time. There could be a military group that's put together of the nations of the OAS who repudiated Maduro, but this is a cancer that's got to be settled. You know, we can't have something as close to America as this as a base of terrorism. It's got to be taken care of. But we also have something called the Monroe Doctrine, which we said we will not permit foreign intervention in our hemisphere. And I think clearly the Russians are staying out. They talk a big game, but they're not going to be involved, and we cannot permit it. But the next thing, of course, that's done is an embargo against the oil company Citgo, by the way, is owned by Venezuela, and that's a company that does business. You may have bought gasoline at a Citgo station. That's a Venezuelan company. And there are other things that can be done, but they have shut down the access to the gold reserves. They've shut down the access to other banking facilities, and the people are suffering. But somehow, again, that military has got to be gotten out of the way, and I'm sure it can be done. Well, in other news, for the third day in a row, much of the nation is suffering under Arctic temperatures. John Jessup has more on that.
Pat, tragically, at least 8 people have died in this polar vortex, and the painfully cold weather still grips the nation with record-setting frigid temperatures. Chicago registered minus 23 degrees, the lowest there since 1994, causing sea fog to rise from Lake Michigan. Snow from icy wind blowing across the Great Lakes could bring as much as 4 feet of snow to Syracuse, New York. In Pennsylvania, heavy snow squalls made for traffic nightmares. Many states are asking people to turn down the heat to avoid straining power supplies. Well, Virginia Democratic Governor Ralph Northam is under fire, accused of endorsing infanticide after comments he made supporting a late-term abortion bill. The bill proposed in Virginia's House of Delegates would have made abortion legal even up to the moment of birth. On a weekly radio show, Governor Northam, who is also a pediatric neurologist, said the issue was blown out of control, claiming abortions performed at that point involved deformed or non-viable fetuses.
If a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mothers.
Now, that comment brought swift backlash. Republican Senator Ben Sasse said, quote, "In just a few years, pro-abortion zealots went from safe, legal, and rare to keep the newborns comfortable while the doctor debates infanticide. If you can't say that it's wrong to leave babies to die after birth, get the expletive out of public office." Northern says he's devoted his life to caring for children, and any insinuation otherwise is shameful. And Pat, the Republican-controlled House voted that bill down in committee.
Well, they should have, and that's what happens in elections, you know. Elections have consequences, and to put somebody in, I remember in that debate with Hillary Clinton, when she stood up for partial birth abortion, it was so shocking she wasn't going to give 1 inch. Yes, I am for partial birth. Now, partial birth, a baby is partially delivered, then an instrument is put into his skull and his brains are sucked out. That is partial birth abortion. And Hillary Clinton, in that debate, said, "I will not allow any limitation of a woman's right." Well, may I ask what right she's got to kill her baby? Well, that's what they're dealing with here in Virginia. Let's keep him safe and comfortable until we decide whether to kill him or not. This is horrible that it's even being considered, but that's how far we've gone. Instead of being a land of the free and the home of the brave, we are now a land that favors death. We are now a death culture, and people are applauding death. And ladies and gentlemen, the Lord himself is going to judge a nation that does this kind of thing to their unborn children. John.
Well, Pat, in financial news, the stock market shot up Wednesday after news that the Federal Reserve is holding off on more rate increases. The Dow closed 435 points up, about 1.8%. The rally coming after Fed officials voted not to increase interest rates. That's a shift from a December announcement signaling more rate increases in 2019. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell says the case for raising rates has weakened. Well, as President Trump's spokesperson, Sarah Sanders has become a household name. For conservatives, she's a hero. But to liberals, especially some in the media, she's part of the problem. CBN's Jennifer Wishon has more from the White House.
Sarah Sanders is the face of the Trump administration, which comes with both arrows and adoration. In a wide-ranging interview, CBN News chief political analyst David Brody and I talked to her about juggling her never-ending job with 3 small kids, the media, and praying for her enemies.
You see a lot of angry faces, people that their sole purpose is to find this gotcha moment to catch you. Their job is not to get information, which is what the briefing is supposed to be.
Sarah Sanders says while the White House press corps can be a tough crowd, that's not why she holds fewer briefings.
The president himself engages with the media more than any president has in history. He's the most accessible, and I think the White House in general is the most accessible when it comes to the media. We have an incredible story to tell, and we're proud and happy to do it. The difference is that the world has changed in terms of how you can interact with the press.
As Congress begins negotiations to avoid a second shutdown, Sanders says the president has already laid out his demands.
Walls should not be controversial. It's just common sense. Walls work.
The president, no matter what the topic is, he's a natural-born leader, and so something that is this big of a priority for him, you can expect him to continue to lead on the effort. I think you'll certainly see him talk about that in the coming days, and including the State of the Union.
Nancy Pelosi says the wall is, quote, immoral.
It's very hard at this point to even take a lecture from Democrats on what is moral and what isn't. People who are willing to allow legislation to pass supporting late-term abortion, the idea that they would take out "So Help Me God" in the platform that House Democrats have raised this week, but the idea that protecting the people of your country, which is the fundamental duty of being president of the United States, would in some way be immoral is a ridiculous charge, and something that I think probably I would think Speaker Pelosi may even regret making that comment because she's seen how ridiculous that sounds, and you know how the evidence is so contrary to that comment.
After two freshman congresswomen were accused of making anti-Semitic remarks, Sanders said there's a double standard on the Democrat side.
Anytime somebody who's not even associated with the president says something, the first thing is, will you condemn? Will you say that this is terrible? Where's the leadership on the Democrat side to call this out? The comments that they've made are outrageous.
As the U.S. prepares to withdraw from Syria, Sanders wants Christians and Kurds in the region to know they'll still have support.
The idea that the president is just stepping away and ignoring any potential problem doesn't understand the fundamental decision that he's made. He wants to bring our troops home out of Syria, but we're not leaving the region.
You are not shy about the fact that you're a woman of faith.
People say you have to separate that. If it's real faith, you can't separate it because it's who you are. It's a part of who you are.
As the Bible says, you know, the Bible commands us to pray for our enemies. Is it hard to pray for your enemies? That list can be long, Sarah.
Actually, it can be, I think, a helpful tool in keeping you calm. There's a reason that God calls us to pray for our enemies, and I think it's to give us better perspective and better understanding of who they are.
Well, I want to talk about the toll that this job has taken on you. You're going to miss moments with your kids, with your family. Do you struggle with mommy guilt?
Oh, every single day. To explain to a 6, 5, and 3-year-old what you do and why it's important is nearly impossible. My oldest is a girl. I think it's very important for her to see, even at this age, that as a woman she can do anything that she sets out to do.
I mean, does it kind of, in a way, blow your mind that, you know, someone like Donald Trump, who is sitting in the Oval Office, I mean, I know you can list the accomplishments, but at the same time, just from a spiritual perspective, there are a lot of Christians that believe for such a time as this.
I think God calls all of us to fill different roles at different times, and I think that he wanted Donald Trump to become president.
He's an interesting pick and an imperfect messenger who requires a press secretary who's quick on her feet. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, the White House.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Pat, as I'm sure you're well aware, this CBN exclusive is stirring a lot of conversation.
Well, I'm sure it is when you say God chose President Trump. That'll get the people, so they're all upset.
It is scriptural. It says he puts kings on their thrones.
That's right. The leaders are put in by the Lord. But anyhow, that's Mike Huckabee's daughter, and she's been doing a tremendous job. What a pressure cooker to be in and to have 3 little children. Yeah. Goodness gracious.
Can't imagine.
Oh, God bless her. Mommy guilt. We ought to pray for her. She's a good lady.